HardTalk has journeyed to Greenland to see the reality of climate change in the Arctic North. And right here is the best place to start, because this fjord was, not so long ago, filled by one enormous glacier. But that glacier is now far, far away. It has retracted more than 15 kilometers in the last decade alone. And as the ice melts, so the pressure on the world's politicians rises. They are due to meet in December in Copenhagen to set the seal on a new climate change deal. But do they have the political will to overcome their long-standing differences? Navigating your way into the Ilulissat Fjord on Greenland's west coast requires a steady hand and extreme caution. The mouth of the fjord is littered with icebergs, some weighing hundreds of thousands of tons. These vast chunks of ice are cast-offs from the Northern Hemisphere's most active glacier. Rising sea and air temperatures have speeded up the collapse of the glacier front. In one recent year alone, the glacier retreated some 15 kilometers. The melting icebergs float out into the Baffin Sea. They take with them an alarming message. Parts of the vast Greenland ice sheet are showing signs of dramatic change. Greenland is the world's biggest island, 8 times the size of Britain, and it's mostly covered in an ancient ice sheet. 10% of the planet's fresh water is locked in this mass of ice. I joined a US Air Force flight carrying a team of international scientists north to one of Greenland's climate research stations, far out on the ice sheet. On the plane, David Etheridge, one of the world's leading climate scientists who pioneered research into core ice some 2 decades ago. Getting in and out of these remote camps is never easy. Flights operate only during the summer. Even then, landing on ice is no easy business. Camp Neem sits on top of 2.5 kilometers of compacted ice, which down deep is at least 130,000 years old. That is, from the period of the last great warming of the Earth. And that's why there's so much international interest in scientific analysis of the ice core. It could be a key aid to understanding the likely effects of global warming today. The drilling and the ice analysis is delicate and time-consuming. It'll be another 2 years before they get down to the deepest and oldest ice. David Etheridge, welcome to HardTalk.
Thank you, Stephen.
What can the ice tell you when you study it?
The ice itself, the ice cores, are a very faithful representation of the atmosphere from literally hundreds of thousands of years ago. And we can tell that, for example, when we measure their compositions, we don't see modern contaminants, things like halocarbons or sulfur hexafluoride compounds, which are only being released into the recent
industrial
compounds.
What exactly can you identify from the sample?
In 1 kilo of ice core, so something about that size, we've got around about 100 millilitres of air. Now, modern analyses can start to really pull apart what that air is made of. We can look at the basic greenhouse gas concentrations, the CO2, the methane, nitrous oxide. We can look at the more dilute compounds, the industrial compounds, such as we mentioned before, but also some of the indicators of past biological activity around the world, which is also incorporated, but at much lower concentrations.
It seems to me the prevailing message from the science, from people like you, is that there is now no doubt that the man-made emissions are directly and causally linked with the warming of the planet. And yet the whole point of this NEEM project is to dig down to ice that is essentially 120,000 years old, which represents a period when science tells us there was another great warming, an interglacial period, which by definition wasn't caused by industrialization or by man.
Sure.
So surely the message of NEEM is contradictory. It's saying, you know what, warming can happen without man.
I don't think that's contradictory at all. I think it actually recognises the fact that there are many influences on climate. What we're doing now doesn't have to exclude what's happened in the past. And what we need to know, and to make future predictions for our future climate, we need to know how the systems have responded in the past. Now, such an example is the last interglacial, which this NEEM project will explore. And that's when we did have temperatures warmer than present. And that's when we had sea levels somewhat higher. Now, we need to understand what were the natural processes behind that, because we rely on these natural processes. We're perturbing them by adding extra CO2 and extra methane to the atmosphere. But in fact, the natural system is working in our favour at the moment. We've added about twice the amount of CO2 than has actually stayed in the atmosphere. We're relying very heavily on these natural systems to take that CO2 back out of the atmosphere. So the ocean,
to inhibit the bad effects.
Yes, they're offsetting, in fact, our emissions. So half of those emissions of CO2 have been taken up into the oceans and the biosphere, the land's plants. Now, we don't know how much longer that can last for. So at the moment, we're getting a free offset. In the future, with warming, the ocean may not be able to take up CO2 as we've expected in the past, as we've seen in the past. But also the biosphere, as the biosphere gets stressed by temperature and precipitation changes, can it continue to take up CO2 by photosynthesis as it has in the past?
I get the feeling that some leading climate scientists are close to despair.
People in this business who are looking down the climate pipe can see these changes coming, and there's been so far to actually reduce emissions. But I think we're starting to get our ducks in a row in the policy world, and a lot will depend on the next few years. We have to act very soon, I think. The long-term changes in these gases means that the sooner we act, the cheaper it will be, and the more impact it will have. If we delay it anymore, we're going to find it much harder to mitigate the changes that are already occurring.
Dr. David Etheridge, thank you very much for being on HardTalk.
Thank you, Steve.
Greenland is a vast ice laboratory. As well as storing hundreds of thousands of years of climate data, it also provides dramatic, real-time evidence of the impact of climate stress. This steep drop in the ice sheet is the very front of the Ilulissat Glacier, the place where the icebergs are disgorged, or as the scientists say, carved. The glacier is disintegrating at a speed which has left international scientists both horrified and awestruck. At the mouth of the ice fjord sits the town of Ilulissat. Traditionally home to hunters and fishermen, this place, with its extraordinary shrinking glacier, has become a potent symbol of global warming. It was here that the Danish Environment Minister convened a meeting of her international counterparts. The idea, to persuade them of the urgency of reaching a deal on climate this December in Copenhagen. Connie Hedegaard, welcome to HardTalk.
Thank you very much.
Your mission is to lay the groundwork for the Copenhagen Climate Summit in December. It is not going well, is it?
It's going slow in the formal negotiations, I think. Negotiators met recently in Bonn, thousands of them, and I think that for the first time there is actual text on the table.
But there was more text when they finished than when they started. They started with about 50 pages and they ended with 200.
I understand that it's unusual in a UN context and in an international context, but that was also why I thought we must do something else, and that is why we brought some of the key politicians here to Greenland, because I think that the negotiators can sit there literally forever negotiating without much progress unless they get some more specific political guidance from their politicians, from their ministers, from their governments.
And the idea here was to bring them to a very remote, secluded place where they could be frank, they could be candid and open with each other. And can you tell me, hand on heart, that behind closed doors, when the candor is there, that they are showing signs of finding common ground?
Yeah, I can tell you, the first day we were up here, after the first session, we took people into group work. It's not that often that ministers are sort of asked to go into group work with one another, in small groups with 7, 8 ministers in each. And I heard in the first group, minister from a specific country mentioning things that I had hoped for years to hear from him. And that is because it is Chatham House rules, it's very informal, it will not be used against him. But people can try to think a bit aloud and then see what is the reaction. If I dare to take this move, what are you going to tell me? So in that sense, it creates more trust. And I think one of the problems in the formal negotiations is there is not much trust, so you stick to what you have.
Well, I'm fascinated you use the word trust, because it strikes me, having spoken to people around this informal dialogue, that trust is still a big issue. And fundamentally, what I hear is that the rich countries and the emerging, poorer, developing countries simply do not trust each other's agendas when it comes to working out a Copenhagen deal.
But I think that still, that's true. It's not so that everybody here suddenly give up every position they have, deviate a lot from their formal mandates. But then in some issues, they come up with new ideas. For instance, we had a discussion here. Will financial support as part of a climate deal go equally to all kinds of developing countries? Or should it go to the most vulnerable, money for adaptation, for instance? And there is a general sense, well, it's fair. It should go to the least developed and the most vulnerable countries. You have not seen that in the formal negotiations so far. So it's just one example. You cannot solve all the problems throughout 3 days here, but you can make significant progress and people start to believe more what the other parts say. If I may just give you one more example, instead of interpreting all the things you say in the most negative way, maybe if I try to understand what you actually are trying to tell me, then it gives a more constructive debate, and that's what we've been experiencing here.
For months now, you've talked about the need for leadership, and you have focused on the United States. In recent weeks, we've seen Barack Obama try to push a US initiative on setting a target for cutting carbon emissions and also establishing a cap-and-trade system inside the US. The problem is, it's not enough, is it? Are you prepared to tell me the US has to do more?
Yes, but...
So bottom line, you're not satisfied with what Obama has done?
Bottom line, I think everybody has not shown all their cards yet. But when we spoke together, I think it was half a year ago.
On HardTalk some time ago.
Definitely. If I had at that time said to you that in July 2009, then we have had a cap-and-trade system out of the House of Representatives in the United States, you would have said, that is not going to happen, Connie. But actually, it happened in a very, very expedient and effective process. Yes, there are still many obstacles on the road, also in the United States, but they have moved significantly over the recent half year.